Good evening, Andy. How are you doing?
I can hear you. I'm just fine. How are you?
Oh, good. So you are running for Congress,
Yes.
for the House of Representatives, right?
Yes.
And
8th district.
your district is?
It's 8th district, which is geographically the biggest district in Indiana. It goes from north of Terre Haute all the way down, well, along the Illinois border, all the way down to the Kentucky border along Evansville.
Oh, wonderful. And is that a new
They did redistrict.
redistrict? Okay.
Yeah, because of the census, we actually, every 10 years, we end up shuffling things around a bit.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I know. I mean, this is for the state. So where I live got redistrict into a new district. And so the way they put it is kind of like very interesting how they draw it. So
well, that is in itself its own issue, in that the census numbers that we used to set the number of representatives at 435 was actually from 1910.
Oh wow.
And our founders really never intended that we would, well, I don't know that they didn't foresee it or something, but we arbitrarily set the number pretty low.
Oh, okay.
And that has its own problems. And
right.
one of the things that I would like to see happen is that us revisit that. Because if we were to do what the founders said, put in as something of a reasonable limit, we would have more like 1,500 representatives.
Oh wow.
And that would mean that we would be having representatives. We have the technology now where they could work from home, their own districts more often, which would make them more accountable to local people.
Local, yeah.
And less accountable to the people, the denizens of Washington, D.C.
Right, exactly. And are you running against someone in the primary?
Well, there's no primary for libertarians. I'm running as a libertarian.
Okay.
And
right.
we're not invited to the primaries. That's another issue.
Oh, so
the laws.
Okay.
The laws in India, the ballot access and partisan laws in Indiana are both unconstitutional and very immoral, corrupt. And it's fairly recent. They've been making it harder and harder and harder to get on the ballot if you're not a Democrat or Republican. And recently, they've even changed the rules to keep out certain Republicans and Democrats off the ballot. And in fact, the Republican Party used that to kick off a lot of, well, actually, a couple of my friends from the Republican ballot.
Yeah, I have a couple of friends that they were being challenged, and so they cannot run for the primary. And so I know, but that's what I expect from the GOP establishment, right? It's nothing new.
Yep. I ran as a Republican for U.S. House myself, and if only living voters were counted, I probably won that election.
Wow. So,
but such is the corruption and the mess in the major party system that I really wish we would rethink our whole. We've become so habituated for voting for only one of those two that it's inherently divisive, and it's destructive and immoral and crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what the founders were worried about, right?
No, they warned us.
They warned us. They're worried about the partisan politics because that is really detrimental to our republic. Which, I mean, it's how to say. So the people, I mean, what the founder wanted is that people represent us. They are also live like us. So any law they pass, they will, they were under that law. But nowadays we don't have that. So the representatives, in both houses, they kind of like live kind of special, kind of first class citizen, right? They kind of live above the law. They are not.
But we choose them. We keep reelecting them. And there's really no excuse for us to have, single-digit approval rates in Congress.
Right.
But the re-election rates have not gone down below 90% since the 1980s.
Right.
And we really have no one but ourselves to blame for who our avatars in Congress really are.
Right. I mean, I had a House of Representative here. I mean, I only see him during the the election time, and after that he's in Washington. He's not coming back, which that shouldn't be. Just like I said, now we have technology to do that remotely. There's no
Yes.
point for them to be there, and
Well,
also
I work remotely every day.
right.
I work in medical device industry, and my engineering office is actually in Edinburgh, Scotland.
Oh wow,
And so it really doesn't. It's not necessary anymore to to live in Washington D.C. and be so close to all of that corruption.
exactly.
And if we were to be a little more sensible, we would expect and demand that our representatives spend more time in the district.
Right,
And yet, it's actually something of a technique of getting reelected that if you pretty much hide until election day,
right,
your chances of getting reelected are extremely high.
right,
If you don't expose yourself to debates or public scrutiny,
right.
then
So
you're more likely to get reelected.
yeah, exactly. And also because of the party machinery, they will make sure that you get re-elected.
Well, it's still all up to us. It
Right,
is still, it's our decision.
right.
And the whole point of elections was that we were supposed to have the power of peaceful revolution so that we didn't have to have the other kind.
Hmm.
And our founders were very clear on this. It's not like they were enamored of, I think they were very well aware that half of us are below average. So, I mean, to be brutally honest, it's not that every one of us is a genius, but we all have our own lives. We know
Right,
what we want, and
exactly.
we're the experts on our businesses, on our lives.
Right.
And uh-oh, did I lose you?
No, I'm here.
Looks like I
Hello.
lost a little. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
I lost video for a second there.
Okay, right.
Um,
There's a glitch.
Yeah, but the bottom line here is that they understood that the other forms of government are worse, and
Right,
that if we don't have the option of firing our politicians, and that's really what this is all about. I mean,
right,
politicians will hire themselves if you let them. The point is of elections, our vote, it's a weapon. We can fire these people,
right,
and we don't have to resort to violence.
right. Exactly. Yeah, in other countries, you have to settle with bullets.
Yeah.
Yeah, but here we just use our ballots. But you are absolutely right. I mean, uh, I I also really blame is on me too, because that's how I voted in the past. I just vote straight ticket.
It's not like I certainly did the same thing. I would say that I voted badly until I was about 40 years old. And at that time, I started thinking more, and I still was doing things that I think are kind of counterproductive. For instance, I don't want to, I guess I have my biases,
Yeah,
but I don't like the primary election system. I
right,
don't vote in primaries anymore because that really serves only two abstract corporate, entities
right,
that are they're private clubs,
right,
and they make their own rules.
right,
They have been given themselves since World War II. They've given themselves special powers,
right,
and they've made it much harder for everybody else to compete. And every year they make it harder. In fact, since Ross Perot, they've doubled the signature requirements to get on the ballot for independent candidates and so on. So it's so if you pay attention to the rule changes, it's obviously corrupt.
mm-hmm,
And yet most of us don't know that. Most of us think that we've had primary elections forever, but they were relatively, basically since the 1970s.
oh,
And since so much has changed since World War II and the 1970s, I think it's time to revisit what our founders really had in mind,
mm-hmm,
what elections are all about,
right,
and what really the two-party system means to us. Because you think about in what other aspect of our lives would we, tolerate only two choices?
right,
Like, for instance, I see you drinking from a cup right now, and I don't know whether you're drinking tea or coffee or whatever it is, but if you're drinking tea, you have infinite options in different kinds of tea.
Mhm.
If you're drinking coffee, it's not just decaf versus caffeinated.
Right, you have
They have different roasts from different
yeah.
places. You can have, they make coffee beans that are actually pooped out the rear end of a civet cat
Oh no.
and made into the most expensive
Yeah,
coffee in the world.
yeah,
So, we have options with cars and with cell phone
right,
plans and, the books we read, but with politics, for some reason, we've made everything binary where you
right,
have only two choices. So either it's sunshine or it's cloudy, either it's black or it's white, either,
right,
so on every issue, we tend to play tug of war, and we've made elections into like this, robbing Peter to pay Paul is what it's mostly all about. But
right,
the election is to decide who's going to be Peter and who's going to be Paul.
right. And
And that's
also,
nuts.
yeah, and also a lot of the times they just put on a show, because once they get to the Senate or the House, Congress, they pretty much, they know each other. They will make sure they all benefit, but they had to put on the show to, to tell the voters that, the other side is bad.
Well, there's a simple thing that's going on there that I think I wish we would pay more. Well, I don't know if it's not paying attention or we just don't think about it. We're just playing our own lives, our own games. But frankly, when politicians make promises and, who are they really working for? They're working for the people that give them money to get
Right,
elected.
right.
So they're, if you look to see where they get their money, the Democrats and Republicans get their money from pretty much the same group of
Mhm,
military industrialists,
mhm.
financial industry groups, healthcare, big pharma, big ag.
Yeah,
And, we kind of push these names around like big pharma, big ag, but we don't think about how that really impacts our politics
mhm,
or what it means when these guys get millions of dollars for a job that pays $180,000 a year.
right.
So they raise many times the amount of money that they're ever going to get paid in order to get a job.
Mhm,
And every dollar that comes along there has some kind of strings attached to it. So, when in fact, I'm going to even say that for me, when I'm going to be going out, I'm going to be asking people for money to help
mhm,
me run for public office.
mhm.
But I'm going to be asking everyday kind of folks,
Right,
because there are two things at play here. I am not any part of that system of pay for play. And I think that, the people who have the big money know that. So I'm going to be getting money from only those people who like what I have to say
right,
and want me to keep saying in Congress. That means I'm going to be getting a whole lot less money. I'm not going to be getting money from the military industrial compound because I'm going to be talking against that.
right. Yeah,
And so there are certain things that carry a lot of weight that I don't think make it into our voting booth decisions, and they really should.
yeah. And also, like just you said, it's our fault, because we let it happen, and also we are, as the voters, we are partisan, which is not good. We,
It
we
is.
yeah, we should think as independent from the party. I mean, we are independent individual, right? We are not. I mean, that's what America is all about. The individual, freedom or independence, or personal sovereignty, or things like that. Is that we do not really, we don't, how to say, in other countries you might have to, but in America we don't have to, belong to any group to live, to live a good life.
But I think we expect that that's our birthright, and that can't be taken away from us. In that, it's frustrating to see how quickly we are throwing away the rights that people
Mhm.
gave their lives to, to
Right,
grant us.
right.
And I get frustrated when I see, I agree with everything you just said, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't. And there are an awful lot of people out there that, they find certain aspects of America, like Social Security checks and so on, more
Mhm.
precious than freedom.
Right.
And, we have been baited, like fish hooks.
Yeah.
we're snagged, you know, or like probably a better example is a monkey trap where we grab onto something and yet the hole is too small to get our hand back out
Right.
and we're trapped.
Yeah.
And so we've become very dependent on government,
Yeah.
where we're educated in government schools. We end up, you know, paying taxes that we expect to get some kind of, you know, return from in some kind of way, kind of like insurance policy. You pay an insurance policy and expect if something happens, you're going to get a payment. And we expect that our roads or schools, all of bridges, all of these things are going to be provided for us.
Mm-hmm.
But history doesn't really work like that. You know, we get these treats early on, and the first people that got Social Security checks got a great deal.
Right.
But it keeps getting worse and worse because of the demographic issue
Right.
of how Social Security was created and how it works.
Yeah.
And if people were to look at it holistically and understand how entangled we are with a complex webwork of things that don't really serve, they don't serve our needs at all.
No.
If you know, it's really thievery. If you look at how our monetary system works, where the Federal Reserve System and, you know, our fractional reserve banking and all the little bits and pieces of this really amount to a theft scheme where they monetize political debts. They devalue our dollar from one generation to the next, and the debts that are growing on our next generation are at this point absolutely unpayable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the how the government can legally rob people's money, right?
Well, it's unconstitutional.
Right.
So, I mean, really, it's all illegal.
Yeah.
Most of what government does is illegal,
Right.
because the Constitution is very clear about what is authorized. I mean,
Right.
the constitutions are all about authority, and laws that are written outside of that authority are themselves illegal.
Right.
So, I mean, if I haven't been elected to anything yet. So if I were to write a law, you don't have to obey it because I'm not authorized. Similarly, when these elected officials are acting outside of their authority and writing laws that have been, well, frankly, even specifically banned by the Constitution, then they're really no different than a crime ring or a gang.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, talk about Social Security. I mean, if you look at it, it's a Ponzi scheme. I mean, right? That's the biggest Ponzi scheme there is. But because it was a government,
it's a shame, and it's difficult to even talk about it honestly because people are. I mean, I am almost at retirement age myself, and so I understand the feeling you get when somebody starts talking about taking away what you're kind of depending upon. An awful lot of people don't have a lot of savings or any savings,
right?
And they're depending on Social Security for their life when they can no longer work. And so at this point, if you talk about even changing the system or changing the way it works, or finding a different way to keep the promises while pushing away, somehow phasing it out, people get scared, and rightly so.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating that we've become so dependent and for so long, so many generations, that we can no longer even imagine how the free market would actually work.
Exactly. Yeah. And you talk about the monkey trap, and actually I saw a documentary on that. So basically, I forgot it's where, it's Africa or somewhere. So basically, they just dig a hole in a tree, and they put peanuts inside the hole. And so for the monkey, when the monkey comes, monkey send its hand into the hole and grab the peanuts, and then now he cannot get out.
Because he wants those peanuts so bad, that he's not going to let go. I mean, if he lets go, he could get his hand out.
Yeah.
But he's not going to let go.
Right.
And that's the way we are with government promises.
Yes.
So we grab onto these things, like public schools that have become destructive to young minds.
Yeah, exactly.
And we homeschool our three youngest, and I know that not everybody can do that, but I grieve for those now who are sort of locked into a system where they really have no control over what's going into their children's minds.
Yeah.
And in some places it's terrible. And I grieve for what, for what some of these mothers and fathers are seeing when their kids come back rebellious and angry. And
well, I mean, in a way, I mean, what do you expect, right? Because I mean,
Exactly.
it's government run school, and it's quote unquote for free. So, and parents feel like they have no right to even challenge what's going on in school.
Free is very expensive in this case.
Oh yeah. When the government says something's free,
Oh yeah.
It's not free. Yeah.
Well, there's an apocryphal story. I don't think it's actually true, but it's a very powerful image when, the story goes that Hitler was arguing with somebody and Hitler just stopped. And he says, you may be arguing with me now, but your children are in my schools.
Yeah.
And you think about how chilling that actually is to have, government schools that are indoctrinating. I mean, the government definitely has its interest in educating children to be good. Well, I hate to say it, serfs. And the original model for the common school system, the Indiana Constitution, the Article 8 specifies common schools, which was a Horace Mann, the idea of making sort of an assembly line for children, where you have a fixed input, that you have this like biomass that goes in, and you give them all, it's like you're pouring chemicals on them and processes, and you're turning them into gears and parts for a transmission or an engine or something like that. Just like you have a specific thing you want them to be.
Right.
And for a government, you want them to be obedient, productive citizens.
Right.
And is that really what we want for our children, or do we want to have disciplined minds that know how to think about mathematics and physics and art and music? And that really, you see how music programs have been disappearing, and people toying with the fundamentals of education, such that it's very confusing for kids, and yet even the academics are giving way to social programming.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you talk about Horace Mann. He actually went to Europe. He actually researched all the models in Europe, and he came home. He brings a Prussia model back, which is before the Germany become a state, and that's the system which give us Hitler, right?
Well, frankly, in Indiana, it was, I think the most influential group was the Owenites, Robert Owen and those guys. And actually it was Robert Owen Jr. Who wrote Article 8, and that ended up getting dropped into the Constitution without debate. There's no recorded debate on that, which is that's kind of suspicious to me.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's a separate, that's a state issue, and that's not my issue. My issue would be the Department of Education.
Federal level, right.
Yeah, that's been nothing but destructive.
So you want to abolish the Department of Education?
Not only, there are several departments I'd like to abolish, but the Department of Education is very high on the list.
Right, and they have a track record, right?
You can see with test scores and costs. Look at the cost of education and the test scores in education since the 1980s, when this department was created. Right.
Yeah, and now the federal Department of Education they are pushing those CRT and critical race theory and social emotional learning, those kind of things, and push down to our schools. And our schools, because of the federal money, they just go along with it, and that is totally that's basically what our founders are against, right? Our founders want us the rights belong to the people.
Right, but you can see this is another monkey trap. In fact, our governor was kind of proud of himself for, releasing, just letting up a little bit on the prohibitions and mandates and all of that stuff as far as COVID goes, in order to keep the federal money coming in. And that is such a problem, and that there's so many cases where the states do things they wouldn't do otherwise because they have their hand in the monkey trap.
Right, right.
And with the Department of Education, that's, it's easy to see that we've got, I don't know the actual numbers. The last time I looked, it was something like we got, 6% of our funding from the federal government, but 10% of our costs. So even though we got this money, it was still a bad deal.
Right.
And yet, because we're getting, you get millions of dollars, and it's kind of like something goes on sale. You don't need it, but it's on sale, so I've got to buy it.
Right.
And it seems to be what states have done with a lot of federal money, where it's free money. I can't pass it up, even if it ends up costing me money.
Right. Well, they want to show that they did something, and
that's, oh boy, that doing something. I'm sorry to react to that.
No. That's I know. I understand that. I had the same reaction. If I was you.
That whole idea of you have to do something.
Right.
Well, does government always have to do everything? Aren't there some things that government should just stay out of entirely? And we have allowed government to infect every aspect of our lives. What is it? I mean, just try to think of anything in our lives. You're looking at even like curtains or something on your windows. There are regulations for everything, and those regulations cost money. And I work in the medical device industry, so I'm in product development, where we always are having to think about, yes, technically I can do this, but how am I going to get it through our regulatory process? And how much is it going to cost me to make this change that would be an improvement, but it's going to take me 6 months to get it through our regulatory process at a tremendous cost.
Right.
And so you think about how much every aspect, just that, you think about how many pages of regulations there are on the sale of cabbage or anything, there isn't any aspect of our life that isn't either, subsidized, taxed, mandated, prohibited, in some way politicized, such that it's more expensive and difficult, and tends to favor large companies versus small companies.
Right.
Because the regulatory legal overhead means that the little guy gets squeezed out.
Yeah.
And if you're big enough to make a campaign donation, you win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so well, we talk about education, talk about the election system and all that. Actually, I'm hopeful this year because there's a lot of Republicans, the rank and files. They are so disappointed and disgusted about what is happening in our state house. We call them rhinos. But I think the rank and file, Republican rank and file, has to also realize that we don't have to vote Republican, right? We should vote based on each individual candidate's qualification.
Of course we should.
Yeah. But
statistically, we haven't been.
Not having yet. I think, but well, I think at least we now, a lot of Republican rank and files realize that we have been screwed by those, rhinos. So, and I think a lot of people like me, this time, we're actually going to pay attention to what is really going on, not just,
There's a lot of good signs everywhere for the first time in my life, frankly. And I hate to be happy about anger, but I'm happy that we're getting angry. I'm happy about the truckers' protest. I'm happy that Donald Rainwater, a libertarian running for governor, got 12% of the vote. And he polled higher than that. And in Pennsylvania just this year, there were, I need to look up the final number, but it was over 140 and I think less than 170 libertarians that are now in office in Pennsylvania from one day.
Wow.
And so just the fact that, that so many got elected, and there are 12 libertarians elected in Indiana right now.
Oh, really?
Most people don't even know that.
I don't know them. I don't know
Nobody hears
anything.
about. Well, see, here's the kicker. We're still told that libertarians can't win, even though there are literally hundreds of libertarians in elected office all across the country.
Mm.
So, why is that, do you suppose? And so
Well, I think, yeah, definitely that is from the GOP establishment.
it's not just GOP, it's the Democrats, the Republicans, the major media.
Mhm.
There is a system that depends on the two-party system, frankly.
Right.
So if you look
right.
to see, where advertising revenue comes from during election cycles, well, it comes from the people who have the most money, and who has
Right.
the most money?
Right.
Democrats, Republicans. Where
Yeah.
do they get that money? We know where they get that money.
Yeah.
We say we don't like it, but we keep voting for it.
Right.
So what has to happen is that we have to match our rhetoric to our actions. We have to finally vote the way we talk, and vote for those people that represent our values in a
Right.
demonstrable way,
Right.
such that they've chosen not to be a part of a crony corrupt system.
Right.
They've chosen, if you're a socialist, you should probably vote for a Green Party candidate.
Mhm.
If you're not a socialist, if you're a constitutionalist, you should vote Libertarian.
Right.
But we've been so indoctrinated to think that we have only two choices, when we're the ones who make the odds. We're the voters. We choose everything.
Right.
And so when we
Exactly.
let somebody tell us that, oh no, that's a wasted vote, you can't choose that, they're basically telling us to throw away our vote.
Right.
Because the whole point is to change the odds. The whole point of elections is that we are the odds. We're the ones who decide how this country is going to be run and by whom.
Wow. And so, what are you running on?
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about already some things. So this, well, I'd like you to go through that. So
Yeah, well,
So
most of the
we'll
time
have a-
people say, that the wisdom
Mm.
in politics is that you have to have three things, because people can only think of three things. But really, my platform it's what it's always been. It's constitutional rule of law. I've annotated the US Constitution, and
Mm.
people have been using it in classes, actually. I'm told that it's useful,
Oh, wow.
and that my annotations point out things that I think that you need to pay attention to.
Mm.
Areas where we have departed from the law in egregious ways, or things that are important for us to understand to get back to the law. So I should probably mention where you can get that. I mean,
Right.
you can download. If you go to wedeclare.wordpress.com,
We declared. Okay.
wedeclare.wordpress.com, on the right side of the page up towards the top,
Mm.
I've got two annotated constitutions. I can't remember which one's on the top. I
Mm.
think the US Constitution is on the top. The Indiana Constitution is underneath it.
That's great. I'm definitely want to read it.
Yeah, and both of them are important. But for my race, it's going to be the US Constitution, which is the guiding set of rules
Right.
that that frankly, I want to chop out everything that's not constitutional. So really, I'm talking about proposing sunset rules and resolutions to start chopping out agencies and phasing out programs. And people will criticize that. This is why I reacted to that do nothing thing.
Right.
We have to do something. The do something that I want to do is chop out what we can no longer afford, what is counterproductive, what is unconstitutional, which the things that are bad in every respect. And that you think we are way past broke. Our monetary system itself is unconstitutional. Our monetary system is supposed to be controlled by the Treasury, which is under the authority of Congress.
Right.
But that's not the way it works right now. We have a Federal Reserve System.
Right. The federal, which are actually a private organization, which are made by the major banks.
It's odd, and that it's not even really private. It is more political than a lot of people realize. In so much as, if it was truly private, they wouldn't be monetizing political debts. What they would be doing is they would be what the original plan, I don't want to get too deep into this because it's complicated.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I remember,
Hello? Hello?
Yep.
Okay, so I can.
I'm back.
Okay.
I think what happened is I started saying something too complicated, and the internet chopped me off.
Yeah.
Either that or the NSA is listening again. But the short answer, really, I was about to get into too deep an explanation. The short answer is we need to have a constitutional monetary system, which allows for our own monetary system. So if we wanted to use gold and silver coins in trade, like the old Liberty dollar system that our feds raided and they took all the gold and silver.
Right.
I don't know if you heard about that or not, but
yeah, I do. Yeah, they actually made illegalized the use of gold and silver,
which is illegal itself. That's unconstitutional. We should be able to trade. If I wanted to trade a goat for something, I should be able to do that.
Right. Yeah.
And in fact, we can really. It's just that there are certain things that threaten the monetary system, and they smack you down hard. So we need a constitutional monetary system. We need to have, we need to chop the size and costs and power of our federal government dramatically.
Yep. Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the biggest problems with, all the COVID lockdowns and the mandates and the vaccine requirements, it's not really whether they're good ideas or bad ideas. It's just that the government should have no power to do that.
Exactly.
And it just isn't their authority. And there are actually emergency rules, like in the state constitution. The General Assembly actually has the authority to suspend laws, but the governor does not. And the reason that was separated out, the reason that only the legislators were given this emergency power is because they're locally accountable.
Right.
It's much more likely that you know where they live. And if they make a disastrous decision that's going to shut down your business, they're going to feel the pain of it.
Right.
Whereas to have everything centrally planned, it's just like central planning anywhere always turns out to be destructive and terrible. Where, ultimately what happens when you have central planning that goes too wrong, you have Pol Pot, Mao, Hitler, Stalin, millions die at a throw.
Right.
You can't allow one person or one tiny group of people to have that much power.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I look at the Republican platform. One of that is they believe in limited government, but I think their understanding of a limited government probably is different from the rank and files of Republicans. I think in a way, I think they look at limited government really comparing with the Democrats.
Well, it's not. I think it's, from my perspective, it's even worse than that. I hope I'm not offending anybody by saying this, but a lot of the people who want their rights to guns don't want to let anybody else smoke pot. The people who want the right to smoke pot don't want anybody to have guns.
Right.
And you can't have your rights if you don't let the other guy have his too. So, it's got to work where, if you want your rights, you have to have all of them for everybody without exception.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to be fighting like we've got right now.
Exactly.
And that's what I'm talking about, that whole tug of war with every election cycle being about who's going to be Peter and who's going to be Paul, who's going to lose their rights, who's going to get to keep their rights or expand them. And it's frustrating to see how, something like marriage, it never should have been given over to Caesar to begin with.
Right, exactly.
But since we have made it all about government, it's really about Social Security, bereavement pay, visitation rights, contractual rights to property, and all of these things that are it's not about love or a holy covenant between a man, a woman, and God. This is Caesar stuff.
Right.
And we never should have given marriage over to government. But because we did, people are fighting over it.
Yeah.
And because, we have so many cases where Republicans in particular have their ideas of morality that are not constitutional. I mean, it's yes, they might be right, they could be correct about, what's right and wrong, but is it's government's job to get involved in people's lives,
Right.
such where we actually have to spy on them to know whether they're cheating or not, or whether they're breaking the law. And that's where we have made government so big with our, Democrats want this, Republicans want this, Democrats don't want Republicans to have this, and Republicans don't want Democrats to have this. And so we're spying to each other, we're lying to each other. We have SWAT teams kicking in doors, to find out who's being bad. And that whole system is based on violence and on taking something from somebody else.
Right.
And really what is fundamentally libertarian is a non-aggression principle, where it's non-initiation of violence. If I want to defend my property, yes, I can, I have the rights to weapons. And if somebody is threatening me, I can defend myself. But we should not be initiating violence, and that goes to government too. Government should not be initiating violence against people.
Right.
And so, it's not a complicated thing. It's actually quite simple when you resolve it down to the simple morality of initiation of violence,
right,
or it's, whether it's constitutional or not.
Yeah.
And in my case, I know the constitutions aren't perfect. And in fact, I point out some places in my annotated constitutions where I think, at least in a lot of the amendments, we've made some mistakes. But I'd be happy with the constitutions as they're written, even something like the 16th Amendment that allows for income tax, if we allowed the government spend only what's constitutional, because the income tax would be tiny if we were actually, if it was funding a constitutional government.
Right. And also, we do make the federal government way powerful than it was designed.
It was supposed to be an umbrella government over sovereign states.
Right.
And so, you read, there are several constitutions. The older constitutions are the better ones. And I don't know if I'm the only one who's read all the state constitutions or not. It's kind of a crazy thing to have done. And maybe that makes me weird, but there are several constitutions like Nevada's, which is terrible. And it essentially grants that the federal government is in charge of individual citizens of Nevada. It's terrible.
Oh, that's bad.
But all of the earlier constitutions, like Indiana's, especially, like Tennessee's got a wonderful constitution. And so you think about how the early drafters of the state constitutions were very, very firm in their defense of states' rights.
Right.
And like Madison and Jefferson wrote the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions to affirm that states will leave the Union if the federal government gets too uppity and doesn't doesn't stay on its side of the fence. So that nullification and phasing out powers and knocking down government really is not only constitutional, but it has precedence. So there have been presidents who have done this. So for instance, what's a good example? 1921 to 20, who was that? I'm blanking on who that was. Shoot. Anyway, he cut the power and cost and spending of the federal government dramatically at a time when employment rates were very high. Harding, I'm sorry, I blanked. So Harding actually cut the size and power of government and undid some of the damage that Wilson had caused. So it is possible, and there are precedents to it. And in fact, nullification happens all the time, where we mostly nullify the Constitution.
Right.
But there are times when presidents actually knock down powers that they don't like. So it's not an impossible principle. It's just that we've been using it badly for the last 70 years.
Yeah, and also, I think in a lot of ways it's a reflection of the failure of education.
Yep.
Yeah, because we never learned our real history. We never really learned. Talking about the students about Constitution and about our founding fathers, and it's always like the government will take care of you. The government will do this for you, do that for you, and yeah. And
I told this story to somebody, I don't remember who it was now, but just recently I was talking about how I understand, that people have been making mistakes and stuff. I have done it myself dramatically. And that story I told was about, I had not read the federal Constitution until I was 30 years old. And I thought, I was actually talking to my daughter about this. And I thought, this is the most wonderful thing. Everybody should read this. This is going to change everything if everybody would just read the federal Constitution. Interestingly, I did not read the state constitution until I was 40. It took me 10 years to put the pieces together and think, I read the federal Constitution. I really need to read the context that the federal Constitution is wrapped around. And that was the state constitution. I didn't read that until I was 40.
Oh, wow.
And then it wasn't until, shortly thereafter, I started reading all the state constitutions. But the point really is that everybody's starting from somewhere. We've all been deceived. We're surrounded, inundated by lies from all sides. And, whether, you read Epoch Times or whether you're, NPR fan or whatever it is that you're listening to, we tend to have our biases and we tend to reinforce our own opinions that we got in kindergarten with what we keep reading throughout our lives. And I started taking this tack of listening to conservative radio, listening to NPR, because those two were, pretty much diametrically opposed. And I think that it helped me see a little bit better what sort of truth might actually be lying in between. And that's where the libertarians, I sort of became a libertarian when I started reading the constitutions, when I started, dissecting this public rhetoric from two different sides that in my view are both wrong.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we really
that's education.
Right. We definitely need, in a way, as a teacher, I think we need to teach the next generation, the students, really about the real, about the Constitution and about the founding fathers. Their concerns and also what they got right and what they got wrong, right? They also are limited by their experience and also the time, what they know. But still, what makes American special is that it recognizes the rights are from God, not from the government.
And even those who were atheists or deists, or, among our founders were a lot of people of different, varying belief systems. But almost to the man, they understood that at least the Bible was something that was in pretty much every home. And it was an understandable and relatively well-communicated system of morality that is unfortunately absolutely necessary if you want to be self-governed. And really what the whole point of, I think I blipped from it. The whole point of a limiting government, if you want to limit your government, you have to govern yourself.
Exactly.
And to govern yourself, have a culture of self-governance requires some kind of commonality in, how to behave. And there was a time when, the Department of Health, Education and Welfare and your insurance company and all, that was your church. If your barn burnt down, it would be your congregation that built it back up again for you. And that carried a responsibility. If you got excommunicated from the church, then you lost that help in education and health. Hospitals were run by churches and voluntary associations. It wasn't just churches. But the point really is that, there were voluntary systems with a voluntary collection plate that served as the basis of morality and functional civility.
Exactly. And also that's why there's no, many countries trying to, copy from American system. Like, for example, China definitely tried that, but it never worked because they don't have, I forgot who said that. One of the founding fathers said our system is only works with religious people. I mean, it's totally inadequate otherwise.
That is Washington. It says wholly inadequate to it. Yeah. So,
Okay.
so you know, the point that the founder and Washington was on, he always left before communion, and so people don't really know what his real belief systems were.
Mhm.
But he was very strong on, you know, many of them. They more or less would believe in God, but not necessarily all of the tenets of the
Right, not
church
necessary to any organized church.
Right, and so you know Jefferson, for instance, wrote his own Bible.
Right, which I mean, as a Christian, I understand them.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of organized churches even today are quite corrupt.
Well, and one of the things that I think is relatively unique to Christianity is the idea of sin.
Right.
You know, where and one of the things I like about the Ten Commandments in particular is that it starts off with the structure of, you know, the first commandment is putting, you know, who really is, you know, there's a respect that has to happen first. So first you have the authority structure, and then you have the specific rules as the second half of the Ten Commandments. So that, you know, like the thou shalt not kill and all of that kind of thing. That's after you first establish, you know, God comes first. Right. And from a secular perspective, you know, one way to look at, you know, that in God we trust is in politics we do not. So, you know, even if you're not into, you know, a specific religion, and I try not to talk about my own faith because people make bad assumptions about it. And it's unfortunate that there are so many bad examples of, you know, and so it's frustrating in politics to talk about it. But one thing that I think is easy to talk about is that faith in government is a really bad idea.
It is.
And that if you put your faith in humans, in, you know, it's more sensible to put faith in your neighbors that you know than it is in politicians that you make into idols. Yeah. And idolatry is another thing that it's unfortunate that that's become a religious concept. Right. Because idolatry is what Democrat and Republican parties are all about. Yeah. You think about how the other guy is a demon and our guy is an angel, no matter how they behave. Right. And that there isn't a word that better describes that than idolatry. And sort of, you can say tribalism and many other things, but you know, the fact that we've got these abstractions that we put them above God. You know, we vote for these things, and we've, you know, made them more powerful in our children's education and our entertainment. We fill our brains with, you know, these idols of politics, and that has been obviously destructive. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and I'm pretty sure if we keep talking about it, we'll spend hours on this. But because there's you can tell it doesn't take much to get me talking, I guess. Well, and also there's a lot that I want to learn from you, and especially I'm going to read that your annotated constitutions, and hopefully I'd really like to have another interview, just talk about that. Sure. I'm actually going to I'm writing a book right now that I was hoping to have done by now. Oh, okay. It's going to be out in Amazon. It's going to contain the annotated constitutions, well, just the federal constitution. Right. I'm going to annotate the Declaration of Independence, but I'm also going to be spending a lot of time on why we went wrong, how we went wrong, and what we need to do to fix it, in my opinion. Exactly. And it's going to be a fairly short book, but it's going to be coming out soon. Is that on pre-order now or? Not yet. So I'm not even ready to start like editing yet. So and my wife hasn't looked at it yet. And that's going to be, you know, she's my editor. Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, thank you. This has been, I've enjoyed it. Yeah. Same here. Okay. Bye. See ya.